I'd like to invite the opening speaker up on stage, which is Krishna Bharat, the creator of Google News. Tell us more about how it happened that you started Google News.
Well, it was right after September 11th. A lot of people were reading news. I'm sure many of you were engrossed by what was happening. And to keep up with what was happening, I had to go to multiple sources of information, websites all over the net. And I realized that the process of tracking a story, which is being covered by multiple people, was extremely inefficient. The web was supposed to be cross-linked. So you're supposed to start somewhere and find links to everything else on the same subject. But when it comes to news, because it's so fresh, the links hadn't been created yet. So it was an inefficient process to find the coverage on what was happening in Afghanistan from the US sources, from British sources, from Middle Eastern sources, and so forth. And I figured it's part of Google's role and mandate to figure out how to make this process more efficient. And also having grown up in India where different perspectives, the Western perspective, the Soviet perspective, the local perspective, came together and the contrast was interesting to me. I wanted to see the diverse voices here. So Google News was an attempt to automatically assimilate links to all the coverage on a given event around the web and make them available in one place so that people can very efficiently read multiple articles, get multiple voices, and understand the subject from many perspectives, thus serving democracy and also making the whole process much more efficient.
So when I go into Google News, I see that it kind of chunks the stories together in clusters.
Yes.
How does that work?
When news is put on the web, our computers detect the fact that a new article has been published. They index the article, which is what Google does all the time. But beyond indexing, they also discover the other articles on the web that are talking about the same subject. And they create this cluster automatically using text clustering. That is something that is taught in computer science courses all the time. In addition to clustering, they're able to infer the amount of interest editors have in the story at any given time. So they can understand that the oil spill story is still very current. There are lots of original reporting going on today. While some of the story might be waning, another one might be coming up. Editorial interest is measurable from the cluster by looking at the sequence of publishing actions that various editors have taken.
So so I think, how many of you guys have a computer science degree here today? Oh, not so many. So Krishna, maybe you can give a very brief popular explanation of this word clustering.
Oh,
thing.
Fantastic. You have filed a story on the oil spill. Somebody else wrote a story on the oil spill 5 minutes ago. These articles were published on different websites. But one of the important things to note here is that journalists are taught to stay on topic, talk about one topic, use words that are commonly understood. So you'd use the word oil spill, you'd mention the location, you'd mention BP. The fact that these features are common to these two articles is strong evidence that they are in fact about the same subject. So that makes it possible for computers which do not understand what BP is or what an oil spill is to bring these two articles together and infer a link between them without having been explained the subject. So computers can very efficiently bring together articles from all over the web talking about the oil spill without any human help if they are programmed correctly. And once you do that, the computers are also able to make some judgments as to how interested editors are, and just a formula. The formula looks at the times at which editors have published the story, and it figures out how recent the publication actions are. If a lot of publishers have published on this story recently, computers compute a score for the cluster that infers that the cluster is actually very important. The story is very important because it's developing rapidly. So all of this is just mathematics and text alignment, which computers can do very well.
So if I understand you rightly, you first check what all the words are in the stories, and then you check how much the language overlaps.
Yes.
Does this mean also that you kind of spot that certain stories will develop certain keywords?
Yeah, it's implicit in the vocabulary that emerges.
Yeah.
That certain concepts are important because they get used by different reporters who independently author on the subject. Of course, we are sensitive to the fact that there are synonyms that are equivalent, that a name can be spelled differently, that are connections between Obama and White House. So you bring in all of these bells and whistles to make the clustering more efficient.
Right. So do you publish the list of the leading keywords somewhere?
Actually, yes. If you go to the Google News homepage and then you see a story, there is a link that says all 500 related or whatever. You click on that, you get to a page where there's even more coverage, and on the top right you will see a set of topics that we've inferred. And that's not the full list of keywords that we've identified, but it is a list of topics that allow you to dig deeper into the story. So it illustrates the kind of keywords that we use.
Yeah. So, but you can also do this across different languages, I understand.
Absolutely. So there is nothing English specific about it, which makes it easy to scale this kind of technology to dozens of languages. I think we have over 50 languages in which we have a Google News edition, and the same approach works everywhere.
Okay. Does this sort of jack into Google Translate somehow, that comparing news stories actually adds to Google Translate as well, or?
Not at the moment, but it's a often requested feature that I know the Greek riots are, protests are happening in Athens. I can't read Greek, so how do I get access to the Greek perspective? Translate, intermixed with Google News would be a very good idea.
In the world of news and journalism, the choice of keywords is almost a political issue.
Well, the keywords we key off are not the sort of the controversial headlines-oriented keywords. They are what is fundamental to the story. If the story is about Obama, there's nothing controversial about the word Obama. It's actually inherent in the story, and so forth. So I don't think that's much of an issue.
So what next for Google News?
I think it's important for us to go beyond the story that is everybody's reporting on, and we need to. That, of course, is already covered. I think there are 4 components that go into making a reading experience rich. First and foremost, you have to understand what happened today. The news of the day that everybody needs to understand has to be understood. Beyond that, there's an appetite for some subjects more than others. When you pick up your print newspaper, you first scan the headlines and read some stories. And then you go to a section that you like a lot. Maybe you're a sports fan or you're a business fan, and you want to go deep into that subject. So, and even within that, there may be a specific topic that you like. You might like golf more than other sports and so forth. I think there's an opportunity to focus part of the real estate on topics that the reader cares about and engage in a dialogue where you find out more and more about the reader's preferences. The risk here is that you might be locking them into a little cocoon where they only hear what they want to hear, but we should guard against that. So in addition to providing you the news you need to know, the news you like to follow will be an emphasis for us. Beyond that, I think people care about what other people are interested in. Most importantly, their social circle. So if my friends are excited about a subject, I need an efficient path to find out about it and also get excited about it and read about it and maybe even communicate. And beyond that, the world at large. What is the world excited about? What is the new fad of the day? So audience interest, my interest, should follow what editors think are important. So I think that's the way we'll be heading.
Right. So you briefly went into that we should try to avoid that people get into cocoons. How do you think is a good way of avoiding that when you start personalizing things this way?
I think you should first start by asking readers what they think is important. And I've done that. So we've put people in front of versions of Google News that were personalized. And even though we did not personalize all of it, we only personalized a certain area, the first concern that comes up is, am I getting everything I need to know? Am I going to miss something? So first and foremost, our readers will make sure that we don't make that mistake. Secondly, I think there is an influential intellectual component to our audience that cares very much about getting the hard news of the day. Right? That's the reason why all print newspapers haven't sort of devolved into just doing entertainment or Britney Spears. Now, why does the Wall Street Journal not do the rational thing of just running Lindsay Lohan stories all the time? Because there's a very important constituency in the public that cares about knowing what exactly happened today in the White House. So I don't think that there's a risk of us personalizing so much that we keep the hard news off the product. Right? And even if people wanted it, I think we have an editorial responsibility not to do that. Right? So absolutely.
Do people try to lobby you when it comes to selection of keywords or algorithms or something for how to lump the stories together?
Well, I think we've heard from the occasional source about why their story isn't ranking as well as others and so forth, but not really.
Right. So is there any sort of like technological holy grail that would give the ultimate Google News service?
It is some of what I had alluded to earlier. I think we need to understand what sustains reader interest. When it comes to hard news, the complex issues of the day, I think there's a lot more to be done. People are overwhelmed by the amount of information that's coming in, and partly, making it efficient to find the different articles solves that problem. But at the same time, it also exacerbates it by giving you many, many options. So understanding how the story is developed, why it matters to you, and getting an understanding of the story at the level that you're comfortable with, and over time, become a more sophisticated reader. I think that's one of the holy grails. And one of the projects we did was called Living Stories, which is in collaboration with the New York Times and Washington Post. And the idea there is people should not wake up every day and confront the same story all over again and read an article that is not connected with past coverage. This is something that Wikipedia does very well. They have a page for every developing story, which is a compendium of all the information gathered thus far. So why can't news publishers do the same thing? So Living Stories allows you to follow a story starting from the latest update all the way back, getting the backstory, and slicing and dicing it in different ways, understanding opinion coverage of this, understanding sort of the macro story, and focusing on different parts of it, and even getting it at different levels. We made the technology available in open source for people to work with. One of the other benefits of this is it makes the story a living story in the sense that it has a single URL that is good forever. That means that people have a tendency to link to it, and there's more eyeballs and traffic coming to you. So restructuring the way we cover news to have persistent resources that cover a long duration story well and provide different views into it, that would be one kind of innovation that we can do.
So how can you see, if we now say that we look at a story and then we look at the history of this story, does the history change as the story emerges? Because often stories can kind of grow together.
It's possible that two stories can come together, but having some kind of structure, even if it's not perfect, is better than having no structure. Right. So today, I think yesterday's article is today's fish wrap, right? I mean we don't want to do that online. The article the journalism that was done a week ago should still pay dividends. It should still be part of a larger compendium that gets traffic and ad monetization and so forth.
Right. So obviously you're very interested in journalism, and at the same go in this sort of like, if we look at the cyber anarchist culture, people say, well, today anybody can be a journalist, and we're talking about citizen journalism, and it is an act, and so on. And what's your point of view here? Is there a future for professional journalism, or do you think everything is going to turn in that everybody becomes a part-time journalist? So
that's a very good point. People have said in the past that every few decades journalism goes through a crisis, right? Because radio came along and they said, oh, print journalism is dead, and video came along and so forth, and none of those things happened. Well, in those cases, the print journalists were power sharing with a few new journalists who had radio stations. So it was still a small group of people, slightly expanded, and ditto with TV. With the internet, people say, oh, it's the same kind of threat. It'll be overcome trivially. No, it's not the same kind of threat. Now, for the first time, every human being can be a broadcaster, can file a story, and so forth. So, incredible amount of competition, and of course, everybody understands that now. What this basically means is that what used to be very simple journalism, who, what, where, when, um, about something that everybody can observe is no longer going to be the basis of business models. So there is a component of the journalism that was happening previously that was enough to sustain newspapers because nobody else could broadcast, nobody else could publish. So now you need to do much more. So when you say professional journalism needs to rise above commodity journalism because almost anybody can report on that Michael Jackson died within a few minutes, and start focusing on where they can add value. And there are many, firstly in terms of content, raising the bar on content quality. If I show you an article from The Economist and I strip the branding off it and about the financial crisis, and I take something in a smaller paper, you can still tell the difference. So the content still matters because the amount of research and analysis that has gone into the production of that. So it's going to be important for professional journalists to figure out why their content is not commodity and why it has a content bar that is above what everybody else can provide. And they can do this in a couple of ways. They can focus on local stories where nobody else is covering. Local is obviously very important and relevant. They can focus on a topic. In fact, all the new media publications tend to be focusing on individual topics. You know, Michael Addington with TechCrunch focuses on technology. TMZ focuses on entertainment. Focus and specialization builds up expertise. They can go into depth. So whatever they write could be a product of a lot of analysis that is clearly differentiated, right? And they can also bring in opinion that people start identifying with and faces and personalities that they actually respect. So Thomas Friedman's is not easily substitutable. People who follow his opinion column are going to tell you that no, Tom's opinion matters to me, right? So there are ways in which journalism professionals can distinguish the work they're doing from what is considered commodity. That's going to be the basis of future business models.
So could you, seeing it from the Google News point of view, how do you distinguish between the people who are journalists and the people who are not journalists in the future?
So at the moment, we have a bar which is a relatively low bar, which requires that the organization that is whose content is in Google News has an editorial process that we can verify exists. Now that said, this lets in a wide range of publishers, and from a freedom of speech perspective, that's a fine thing. Beyond that, we look to signals of reputation and quality, both real-world signals as to circulation numbers and stuff like that, and also online behavior. When readers pick out a known brand, like in the context of US sports, they may click on ESPN preferentially to other papers. That's a sign to us that our audience respects this brand. So we have a policy that says we want to encourage as many people to speak up as possible, but we also want to pay attention to what our readers consider as quality journalism. If there are other signals that we can pick up on, other standards out there that measure quality, we would love to incorporate those. But I think we do want to focus on high quality journalism.
So here, when it comes to quality and these things, these are often cultural interpretations as well. So I mean, you would say that a story that would, for example, you would have a different news angle in a conservative newspaper in Pakistan as you would have in a conservative newspaper in India. And so how do you satisfy this diversity of groups when you come into many truths and many sort of indices of quality?
Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting point. We have two priorities that are in conflict here. On the one hand, we want to pay attention to what the audience thinks is important in learning what to feature. But at the same time, we also want to promote diversity. We do want the American audience to understand the local angle. And if there are multiple points of view, we want to pay attention to the different demographics and what they're saying. Showing you 3 articles that approximately say the same thing is not valuable. So with this in mind, we provision for both local audience reputation as well as the global audience reputation to factor into it. So if Al Jazeera has a big following in the Middle East or in Europe, and they read a lot of that, and the American audience does not, it may not get shown a lot because of the American audience appeal, but it will get shown because of the world audience appeal. So both these factors influence how we pick the sources that we show. So that'll bring in the diversity.
Right. So does this mean that also that you will start looking at stuff like digital identities and so on? Because this, in a way, if you mimic the reader, then you can also, that will work as a filter for what that reader perceives as a relative content.
So can you explain what you mean by digital identity?
Oh, digital identities. Let's say that I collect everything that's available to be known about you and your choices in various situations. And then I construct a sort of a self-learning, self-developing filter for that will basically provide you with suggestions for the stories that one thinks fits you by mimicking you in a sense.
This ties back to the personalization factor I mentioned earlier. I think this is something that Google News can do, and every publisher can do with the audience that comes in, based on the choices that they make every day in the articles they click on. You start understanding which sports they follow, which companies they care about, which industries they care about, and so forth. And it allows you to customize part of the experience to what would appeal to your audience. Now, that said, once you've discovered in the Google News context that the reader has a preference for certain sources, I think we serve them well by providing the other sources as well as things they can fall back on. Because even if you're not a habitual Fox News reader and prefer some other source, occasionally there's a title on Fox News that catches your eye and makes you wonder, what is the angle they're taking here? So I think diversity is important. At the same time, I think we should promote, first and foremost, what the reader enjoys reading.
Right. So let's say that we would turn this the other way around, because now you're offering the readers stories they might want. But would it be possible to that Google would, for example, offer writers a tool where you write a story and then Google says, well, this might have an audience of this size and here and there in the world and so forth?
That's interesting. I mean, there's a precedent already in advertising. I mean, it used to be that everybody got shown the same ads in print and other places, but then online we realized that showing the same ad to everybody does not make a whole lot of sense. We need to understand our audience better. We also need to understand the context in which the ad is shown. I think there is some of that already happening in Google News implicitly. The links that you see next to a title are the ones where your eye next falls on, tend to be related. So if the presentation itself promotes other articles based on the context, just in the context of the article that was leading. That said, there's a lot more to be done. I think journalists should worry about creating content, and then there should be other people and technologies that worry about bringing the content in front of the right people. So it's the inverse of the problem that we originally set out to solve, which is, given the article, what's the best set of eyeballs for it? Right? And that can be solved again through personalization. Beyond that, there are other opportunities. Social networks offer a convenient vehicle to have your content disseminated to fans. So if you can plug into the social networks, the social networks can be organized in a way that people who are interested in the fiscal crisis in Europe congregate somewhere. Right? Getting your content to that demographic would be easier. Then lastly, I think you have an opportunity to structure your website or your output in a way that leads to revisiting. So that the earlier mention of living stories or topic pages creates a destination that people come back to when they want a certain kind of story, and specialization also helps.
So do you believe that ads are a viable business model for journalism in the future?
They can sustain a lot of journalism, let's put it that way. Ads, the first thing that happened with the internet is that ads became much more efficient. It was possible for advertisers now to know how the audience is responding. This was something that was not possible with print earlier. And also, they got a lot more options on where to show the ads. So you could, when somebody's reading an Iraq story, they don't want to be shown tourism ads. But if somebody's going to Expedia, showing tourism ads makes a lot of sense. So lots of other places to show ads. So the first thing that happened was advertising became a little bit more challenging. But as the targeting becomes more sophisticated, when you start understanding that, well, I don't want to show you ads for tickets to Iraq or Iraqi brides when you're reading an Iraq story, but chances are you are having an interest in world affairs and politics and so forth. You come from a certain demographic, and then we can show you other kinds of ads that actually monetize very well. I think more sosophistication in ad technology is going to help that.
But the question is, the production cost of journalism is still pretty high, and when you're selling ads, you're targeting eyeballs and brains behind those eyeballs, and I mean, you've really found a bit of a holy grail there when you sold ads on searches, and it's a bit difficult to sort of make writing stories a cost-effective alternative to that. And now also, Facebook is selling ads now based on your social graph and so on. So the question is, seeing the competition by companies like you and Facebook that are offering advertisers a good service, and you're offering the users actually offering us free tools instead of stories like the journalists used to do, or still are doing actually. Do you see that journalism can remain competitive here?
I think there is a lot of journalism that can be monetized through ads, and in particular, coverage of sports and entertainment and so forth, right, has historically done very well with advertising. Hard news has always been subsidized by other kinds of journalism. The cost of covering an Iraq story is tremendous. So the question is, how is that going to be funded? It could be done by, it could be public service journalism funded through other means from the public. It could also be that there is consolidation in the space, and there are relatively few outlets that produce hard journalism, and therefore, by being providers of hard journalism to a larger audience, they're able to be sustain that business. Beyond that, there's also the possibility of subscriptions. Right? Subscriptions allows us to, if you raise the bar sufficiently in terms of quality, and if the presentation is compelling, and you can distinguish that product quite a bit from everything else out there, then you can potentially charge for it. So I think that is a viable business model going forward.
Yes. Well, people are looking a lot at new business models now, and it seems that different types of storytelling can have different types of business models, as you hinted. As I understand, if you look at like TechCrunch, they earn pretty much on conferences.
Right.
That kind of brings us to the quality of the business model and the journalism. Which are business models that incentivize quality journalism? And I think, I should admit that maybe ads haven't always brought incentive to the most high quality journalism, because basically you're selling raw eyeballs in many cases. So, it seems we would need business models that would put less focus on Lindsay Lohan and more on the important news that matters for society.
I think there is a continuum from hard news all the way to pure entertainment. And if you look at sports journalism or entertainment journalism, they sort of straddle the boundary. Where does following the reporting on a sport end, and where does watching the sport begin, and ditto for entertainment? So I don't want to be critical of the audience that follows sports or Lindsay Lohan. There is a market for that, and they'll do very well. There's no question about that. The question is, how do we raise the bar on quality and make it monetizable in a way? And in fact, these two are interconnected. As long as hard news is sort of interspersed with all of these other things, I think it's going to be very hard to distinguish why this product is different from any other product. So I think with specialization, once you become a channel like The Economist or something where you specialize in hard news, people understand why you're adding value. And once they understand why you're adding value, they may be willing to pay for it. So I think there's a future that is based you have to understand fundamentally where your strengths are as a organization producing journalism, and you need to focus and excel in that because there's so much competition. The flip side of competition is that the ones that demonstrate excellence will survive. So I think there is a bright future for people who decide that they're going to be excellent at what they do and they want to focus.
But they need excellence, but they also need a model for sustaining the excellence. So, so the question is here, well, have you, I know that you think a lot about these issues and that you care a lot about quality in journalism, and you have some thoughts about how one can improve this.
Right. So I think firstly, the industry needs to move in a direction where there's more consolidation, more focus on topics, and clarity on why they're adding value. Secondly, the process of paying for journalism should become much simpler and more natural. Right? And I think with the apps on iPad, there's a sign that people understand what they're buying, and it's relatively simple to pay for it. That said, I have some concerns about the fact that apps in some sense step backwards. It's hard to link to them, it's hard to discover them, it's hard to share them. But I think those are solvable. So I think once people pay for cups of coffee at Starbucks, which they could actually make at home for free, presumably, because of the experience. Maybe the brand, the experience, and the environment in which they drink the coffee. I think if you were to show people, the website of the Wall Street Journal, the website of a small paper, there isn't a huge lot of difference in the website. There really discernible difference there. So I think there's a lot more innovation to be done in terms of packaging and personalization. And part of that is prefetching the content you're likely to read onto your mobile device and making sure that it loads instantly. The speed is a huge incentive here. And also making it available offline. So there are a lot of things that apps can do for you on a mobile device that hitherto has not been invested in on the web. So the more compelling you make the app, the more innovation there is in presentation, infographics, I think there'll be clearly discernible value there and people will be starting to pay for it.
Right. So obviously Google is a name that pops up a lot when one talks about the future of journalism, and you kind of carried an iconic role there, can we say, in the change of times. And still obviously you also care about what happens to journalism. And
yes.
Vint Cerf is an advisor on our board, and he's certainly very committed to this too. So the question is, what's Google's role in the future of journalism as you see it?
Right. So when the decision to take content and put it online and monetize it with ads was done, which is 15 years ago, we didn't even exist. So problem started before we existed, the threat to monetization. But subsequently, we've played two roles. One is to help people discover journalism through Google News, Google Web Search, and Google News Search embedded in Web Search. And also, we've been helping on the ad side. So in terms of traffic, there are 100,000 clicks a minute to publisher websites because of activities that Google does, and 1 billion clicks a month from Google News itself to publishers. So in terms of traffic and monetization, we've been partnering with the publishing community. But going forward, I think there's a lot more to be done. There are other roles we can play. And our interest in this is purely because we want to make sure that the content people are looking for exists and is viable. Right? I mean, our ambition is not to be a media company. We want to be a search engine first and foremost and help people find content. So making the process of payment painless and natural, I think would be one area that we would be interested in helping. So for example, we have technologies like checkout, and also we have login and authentication support that we can provide. In a world where people buy access to content in one place and then consume it in 5 different devices, it becomes important to know that you've bought access to, say, the Wall Street Journal or ESPN or whatever, and whichever device you pick up, it's kind of just magically works. So some of that plumbing and technology is something that we can certainly help with, and we also have the ability to experiment and the luxury to experiment, and it's one of the reasons why we've focused on speed as a factor. Having persistent resources like living stories as a factor. So one of the projects we did in partnership with publishers was called FastFlip. And FastFlip, we observed that people read a lot more news or a lot more of anything if it loads really fast. So if you turn pages of a magazine and it takes 10 seconds to turn each page, you won't read very many pages. On the web, most websites with all the media content inside it take about 10 seconds to load. And so Fastlook was trying to make the consumption of news a really fast experience. So I think we can partner in speeding up the web, in making monetization a little bit more efficient, and also in personalization. So we have an investment in personalization that once we sort of get it working on Google News, we can take that technology and make it available to publishers so that they can engage their audience a bit more by understanding where they're coming from, transforming their website appropriately.
So how does your collaboration with the news industry look like? Because this collaboration you have, right?
Yeah. So I think we've had technology for a long time that could have been of use to the news industry, and over the last year we started proactively talking to them about using this technology on their sites. So that is definitely a shift on our part, because we realize it's a priority both for the community and for us. So it's shaping up nicely.
Yeah, right. So if you would have, let's say you would give us a vision of how you think journalism will look like in 5 years' time.
So in 5 years' time, I mean, it's a long time to predict because on the internet everything moves so fast. I think there'll be a lot more clarity about the role of every journalism organization, why they're there, what is their focus, and what is their strength. Is their strength because they're local, because they have expertise in a certain area? Are they going to go deep into something, and so forth? Or do they have a bank of opinion leaders, or some combination thereof? Right? And there will be a willingness to engage the audience using social networks, much more so than today, to make sure that the most relevant news is being covered and voices are coming in from the audience. There will be efficient packaging that allows people to easily opt into reading something, even if it costs them something, billing schemes that maybe work with a carrier or pre-existing credits, then make the whole process of paying for journalism much simpler. Much smarter ads that understand the audience better and market the right kind of things to them and make money for the publisher. And also interesting new ways of packaging. So knowing that somebody's interested in golf or fast cars implies that a lot of the content in individual constituent publications should now be kind of streamed to that particular set of eyeballs to keep them engaged, and with revenue coming from that being distributed to all of them. That process should become much more efficient.
How about we take a few questions from the audience?
Sure.
Anybody have any? Yeah, okay, there we are.
My caricature is that on one side you have online aggregators who think that they're doing publishers a great favor by driving traffic to them. And on the other side you have publishers who think that they're having their lunch eaten by the aggregators, partly because a lot of users don't need anything more than headlines. Or perhaps just because they don't understand the situation or for whatever reason. How true is my caricature of the divide between those institutions historically? What is the trend? Are they getting further apart or closer? And how can such smart people who are in such similar businesses have such divergent opinions apart simply from their divergent business interests, if there is any other explanation?
So the other explanation is sometimes you need somebody to blame. So I think the people who run the publishing houses understand very much why the economics went south. When every citizen can become a publisher and a broadcaster, and ads that you had a monopoly on could be pasted anywhere, independent of aggregators and search engines, I think you have a problem. But explaining why in 15 years you've not been able to solve that problem is complicated, so it's easy to blame somebody. But it's true that there's now those positions, which used to be rather extreme, have softened quite a bit, because I think publishers realize that Google is actively trying to help by building technologies that will help monetize, help personalize better, help put smarter ads in place. And also, they have managed to find other avenues to market their content. For example, the new wave of apps that are coming out on iPad and other tablets, I think are very promising. So I think people have moved on. That phase is over now, and I think people are now trying to be constructive and work together to make payments simpler, create new opportunities for people to consume content that is of high quality that they can actually pay for.
Okay, Matti.
My name is Matti Posio. I'm a Finnish newspaper editor with the paper Aamulehti and an INJO fellow here at Stanford this year, also at Hearst Newspapers. My question, traditionally it has been the editor's job to choose which stories are big and which are small and which are important and which are not, and which are news and which are features, and so on. Now with Google News, it's not exactly clear who chooses the stories, who puts, it might be the computer, but it's not the computer. There must be someone behind the computer to choose which stories come up first. And in our newspaper, if something goes wrong, you'd complain to the editor-in-chief. Who can we complain to in your case if we might have a problem with something, and what's the structure? Who is the editor of Google News? Thank you.
Google News is playing the same role as search engines have always played, which is to take you to the place where the news is featured. That said, we have a ranking component to it, as search engines have always had, and that ranking component is completely automated. So in the case of Google News, how do we operate? We pay attention to the editorial decisions that different editors have made. So if what your paper chose to cover, when you published it, and where you placed it in your front page, factors into our ranking. So in some sense, it's fair to say that you are the ultimate editors of Google News, collectively. So in the Finnish edition, for example, of Google News, the top papers have a large role in determining what the top story is on Google News, based on their own publishing actions. So with respect to, if you are not happy with their ranking on Google News, who do you talk to? We have a support team that can be reached, and addresses are public that you can contact. But ultimately, the ranking is a function of what the local papers thought was interesting that day. So, the responsibility is of all the editors to get it right. And I think if enough of them pick the right stories, Google News will reliably feature it at the top.
I'm Tim Dickinson with Rolling Stone magazine. You spoke about
Can you speak up a little bit?
Sure. Tim Dickinson with Rolling Stone magazine. You talked about an editorial responsibility that Google News has, and I wonder, why doesn't that extend to investing in actual journalism?
So I think, I think our responsibility is to make sure that the fundamental, role of journalism is not forgotten, right? To make sure that you understand the news you need to know to make the right decisions in your life and as a citizen, right? That was what I was alluding to. Now, hiring journalists and putting them in charge of the paper, of our rankings, would firstly not even scale, considering the rate at which articles are coming in. Several million a day would be more than any journalist can possibly cope with. And secondly, it would make us, our objectivity would be compromised. It's much better for us to consult the editors in the individual papers. I use consult in inverted commas, because we are actually measuring the editorial actions and drawing inferences. But ultimately, we are keying off human judgment in newspapers around the world. So there is a human component here.
The question is less about putting humans in charge of the aggregation, but actually investing in the production of original journalism, as Yahoo, for example, is beginning to do with their news.
So there are many ways to do that. I appreciate the point, and this is something that we are actively thinking about. How can Google invest in journalism as a whole, not by picking individual sets of people and say, you come write for us. There's got to be a better way.
All right, last question. Amir.
Hi, I'm Amir Jahangir. I'm from Pakistan and I have one video with me. On the future of journalism, as David put the emphasis on...
Excuse me, Amir, if you can stand more sideways and speak a bit loud. Yeah.
The future of journalism and the importance of keywords as the web is evolving from text to multimedia now. Do you think keywords can be replaced by images, and images will play an important role in terms of search engine optimization?
So, even to this day, people are searching for all kinds of content, both textual content as well as multimedia, using words. So I think keywords and text will continue to be the primary key on which search engines operate. But that said, there are other signals that go beyond that. So for example, knowing what the reader has been looking at in the past and patterns gleaned from other readers that say that if you liked X, you also like Y, a bit like what Netflix does when it suggests movies to you. It goes beyond text. It goes into understanding taste through actions in the past and patterns in the actions and collaborative filtering. So there's a lot we can do beyond text, but I don't think analyzing images per se is going to be necessary in the near term. Thanks.
All right, Krishna, thanks so much for coming here.
Very welcome.